All right, welcome back to the one and only Phil Bach podcast. Of all the episodes that we've done, the episodes with Ben Hunt have been perhaps the most powerful, the most memorable, the most evergreen of any of the episodes that we've done. People talk to me about it all the time. Well, maybe not all the time, but when people do talk to me about the podcast, very often they talk about these episodes. They're very special. We've done 3 episodes already, going back almost 5 years now.
Crazy.
Right? I mean, time truly flies. So does my hairline, but so it goes. I'm so happy that Ben has agreed to come back for a fourth time, so we can talk about narratives again. We're going to talk about the intellectual rot at American universities, financial nihilism, and more. Ben, thank you for coming on.
Pleasure to be here, Phil. As always, your hairline and mine. We are the tides of time for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. We can mark years now on our on my head.
Like a tree ring, it really is. It's the same principle.
So I thought we'd start here, kind of like restating first principles. And this thing about narratives, I was first introduced to the idea of narratives, certainly the ideas of narratives in markets or driving markets. I was introduced to that by you. And it's the kind of thing that once you see, you can't unsee. And you see it
Yep.
everywhere. And I see it everywhere. And I've come to saying now, narratives drive flows, flows drive performance. And narratives are really the impetus. And that comes, of course, from things that you've discovered and written about and talked about. So let's just kind of like back up to here and kind of restate first principles, especially for people who maybe haven't heard the previous episodes or
Sure.
haven't read Epsilon Theory. What is a narrative? Like, what does all that mean?
Well, and I'll tell you right now, Phil, the word narratives has become so overused now. I actually don't even use that word very much anymore. So what I mean by a narrative, think of it as like a story arc. Think of it as like a script. It is a story with a beginning and a middle and an end that humans tell each other and we tell ourselves about, well, everything in our lives. And we tell ourselves the same stories over and over and over again. We just change, a name here and there. Love to use the example of Law and Order, which is a show. There are 600 and something episodes of Law and Order. And I haven't seen all of them, but I've seen a lot of them. I watch a lot of TV, Phil. People say they don't have time for TV. I say you make time for TV. But but the thing about Law and Order is that 600 and however many episodes that they filmed, there are only 12 scripts. There are only 12 scripts. And each of those scripts has exactly the same framework. It's a 3-act structure, which, by the way, every movie you've seen in the last 50 years, every scripted television show follows a 3-act structure. At precisely halfway through Act 1 in every Law and Order episode, you will be introduced to a seemingly tangential character. It might be a neighbor, a family member, somebody who witnessed the crime. It'll often be played by a character actor who you recognize. Well, that character is introduced right midway through Act 1. At the beginning of Act 3, near the peak of what's called rising action in script language, that tangential character will be reintroduced as the character upon which the entire court case resolves. Every single episode, without fail. What I mean by narratives is the same thing for when we're talking about markets. When we say we're bullish on financials, or you read an article saying that, well, we have to think about where we are in the business cycle and what that means for monetary policy. The language we use to describe being bullish, the language we use to describe dovishness in central bank policy, the language we use to describe a political candidate and their positioning, the language we use about everything, it's just a story. And there are a lot of these stories. There are more than 12 scripts for real life than there are for Law and Order episodes, but it's a finite number, right? It's not a lot more than 12. I mean, I make it up. But we think there are. I mean, we've done. It's the scientific study of linguistic patterns that we as humans use to talk others into something, to talk ourselves into a viewpoint or a position, and it's, to your point, Phil, once you start looking for it, you'll see it everywhere. There is a pattern and a structure to storytelling, and it's represented within linguistic analysis. So it's using these tools of natural language processing, embeddings, architectures, generative AI to really help with this. This is what we do. And once you start seeing the world in those, through that lens of narrative, of storytelling, that's structured, that's been weaponized, frankly, against us, it really is, you can't unsee it once you see it, to your point, Phil.
So those tools that you have, the NLP and the analysis, those are to measure the narratives, to make it real and tangible. So when people are talking about, well, NVIDIA's valuation can be infinity because of AI, it's a great story, right? But why is NVIDIA's valuation so much higher than a brick and mortar or manufacturing company? It's not just the projection for how big their business is going to get on the strength of new orders because of AI. It's the story that blows it up and amplifies it even so much more so. And you're able to then track and measure that. And when we look at, what's driving stock prices and what's driving markets, right? It's not the future, it's not the present value of future cash flows. I can promise you that, not anymore.
Right.
Maybe it will be once again. These narratives allow you to understand and analyze what's moving, why it's moving, where, who's pushing that narrative through, and how strong is the narrative.
Correct. So there are at least three big structural changes that happened in our world in the early call it to early 2000s, right around the great financial crisis, a few years before, leading to a few years after. But one of them is the growth of 24/7, always on, I'm going to use air quotes here, news media, both around politics, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, but also markets, business news. So CNBC, Bloomberg. Today, look, Wall Street Journal, Dow Jones, parent company, New York Times company, Washington Post. These are also 24/7, and we use air quotes, news organizations. The reason I'm putting air quotes is that you can't have 24/7 content out there. There's not enough news to go around. So what takes the place of that structurally in media is opinion presented as news. So easiest example is like Bloomberg or CNBC programming, where I'm telling you, 99% of the programming is somebody coming on to tell you an opinion, and that is presented to you as news. This happens everywhere, right? So there's a structural change in media, 24/7 news dissemination requiring more and more opinion presented as news. That's, big change number one, structural change number one. Structural change number two, social media, and as I like to call them, dopamine machines, the infrastructure to distribute messages to us all the time. All the time. And we're all addicted to it. Certainly I am, where I call it my dopamine machine. I willingly allow messaging to wash over me all the time. All the time. And that is a relatively new phenomenon, certainly over the last, call it 15 years or so. So you've got structural changes in media. You've got, I'll call it a structural change in the media dissemination that are allowing messages to be with us morning, noon, and night constantly. And then I would describe the third big change as everybody gets in on the act, meaning that, and they're very upfront about it, but Ben Bernanke's big thing as Fed chair was that he would use words forward guidance to try to impact markets directly. And that's been the policy ever since, to use our words not as a lie, maybe, but to affect, right? So that the words are chosen specifically to try to influence behavior. So all politicians do this.
It's a pump.
All
It's a
central bankers
narrative.
do this.
Yep, it's a narrative and it's a
To
pump.
tell a story. And think about CEOs. Think about Genshin Wang, the NVIDIA CEO. He's a master storyteller. He's fantastic at it. He tells a great story. And that's what you want in a CEO today. A CEO needs to tell a good story because that's what drives a multiple. That's what's always driven multiple, is storytelling.
Yeah.
So, look, Phil, value itself is a story. It's all stories all the way down. It's all stories all the way down. But think about this, Phil. I mean, at the crux of value investing is this idea that, I see value, I see worthiness in this company that others do not see. That others do not see. It doesn't trade where it should trade because I've identified something that is special about this company that the rest of the world does not see. So I'm going to buy it. I want to take a position in this company. Now, when do you get paid as a value investor? You get paid when the rest of the world sees what you see. You get paid as a value investor when that story, there's value here that's not being adequately paid for, recognized by the market, when that becomes the story. So it stories all the way down, and it's a mistake, I think. Well, look, I grew up in the church of value investing. I think most of your listeners did. I know you did, Phil. And it's a hard pill to swallow that the aspects of a company's story that we thought were important are less important today. But it's a lesson we need to learn, one way or another. We can learn it the hard way or the easy way, but we got to learn the lesson.
Right. It's really incredible. I had an experience recently, we're specializing in REITs, and somebody came to me, very deep expertise and experience in the REIT industry, and said, look at this. And he found, sure enough, in the, deep into the 10Qs and 10Ks of a REIT, discrepancy that we think the market is mispricing how that REIT is, what that REIT owns essentially. But again, I said, so what? So maybe we're right, and maybe the market's wrong. The market isn't going to care to reprice based on this finding. If we were there is no mechanism. And when you look at the markets, right? So you look at all of a sudden options volume flipped and started exceeding equity volume about 2 years ago. The explosion of 0-day options, not to mention NFTs and this whole idea, ETFs are spent years trying to work on smart beta factors and different ways to try to tilt the odds in your favor. And now it's just about, hey, let's do a triple FANG ETF and just find different ways to give people just essentially leverage or high beta in different forms. And you published a piece recently about financial nihilism by someone named Travis Kling, and I think it all connects. What is financial nihilism? What is that about?
Well, the basic idea, and Travis is a great guy. I mean, he's in the Bitcoin world, right? And what he's reacting to, I think quite correctly, is what he sees dominating that world of Bitcoin and crypto more broadly, which is simply fuck it. All right. I mean, pardon my language, but that's what it is. Because, there used to be this idea that, what's your crypto project? What good are you doing in the world with which your tokens and your coins are an integral part of how you're funding the project or how it's creating a new way of doing whatever. Nobody even pretends on that stuff anymore, right? It's just, you know what? I'm doing this because I want number go up.
Right.
Number go up is all there is. And I get it. I get it. When you have the sort of wealth inequalities that we do in the world today, whether we're talking about buying a home, whether we're talking about getting a job, whether we're talking about making enough money to live the way we're told from, we tell our kids, you're a star, you've got this great future, you're going to live like whatever. But just to make enough money to maintain the same standard of living that your parents have today, on top of whatever, debt you've taken out to do your, 4 years or longer of ridiculously priced educational certification, why not put it all on red? Or hell, red's only a payoff of 1-to-1. Let me put it on 00. Let me take an out of the money single day option and why not?
If you can
That's
ascend,
financial nihilism, that there's no way to get ahead except to take enormous risks.
sure, I mean,
And so why not?
if you can ascend into the level of asset owners, right? I mean, the consensus view is that the stock market can go up 10% a year, that Bitcoin can go up maybe 20% a year, right? If you own $1 million of those assets, guess what? You just made, right, more money than you're probably going to make in most jobs. Working your labor for an entire year is not worth as much as just owning the assets that the Fed is continuously pumping, that the markets are continuously pumping with no end in sight. So hard work is not rewarded. Saving, I mean, are you kidding me? Saving is intentionally, they're intentionally going to erode your savings if you're not invested in the casino. So look, if you're priced out of housing, if you're not an asset owner, you're just going to keep sliding backwards. And the wealth inequality gap keeps, not only does it keep widening, but wealth mobility is dropping. And what is the American dream if not wealth mobility? So the only thing you can do is go for broke. Take the long odds and try to get into the asset owner class, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to participate in what's happening to the markets.
Well, that's the story that we tell ourselves, that the only way is to take a crazy chance and to, put it all on this option. I would tell you, Phil, that I think that story is also intentionally promulgated. I think that it's a story that is the counterpoint to the other story that we tell, that in order to be a good citizen, in order to be a successful citizen, you must go to a college and pay, it's, I mean, I happen to be into this stuff, so I know what it is, but University of Miami, Vanderbilt, it's $100K a year, all in, it's $100K a year, it's $100,000 a year. I went to Vanderbilt as an undergrad. I still have a great relationship with Vanderbilt. We do our conference at Vanderbilt. We're building a research center at Vanderbilt. So this is not about Vanderbilt. It's not about any individual school. What it's about is infinite financing made available for that. So if you get in, your parents, you, the student, you can pay for it. The federal government will give you as much money as you want to pay for that institution. You can never discharge those debts out of bankruptcy. They're with you the rest of your life. I don't like the idea of the government saying, oh, well, we'll just write them off now for you. I don't like any of that.
And giving hope to other people that it will get written off.
This is the system that we've built. This is the world that we've built here, Phil. I call it the long now. And it's a phrase actually taken from Orwell, like all of the good. I mean, he was the GOAT when it comes to writing about these sort of worlds. But it's the long now where the present is everything. And we are served up a diet of perpetual political fear and perpetual economic stimulus. We take from the future, that's what debt is, right? You're taking from the future to fund your consumption today. That's the other thing. I mean, higher education today is not an investment good, it's a consumption good, or at least a major part of that 100K a year is a consumption good. We've built a world where we pull forward from the future for consumption today. It strands, it maroons entire generations in a position where they believe the only way to get out of that state of constant debt and subclassedness is to take a crazy chance. And then we've built the rest of our society around taking advantage of their chance taking. Right. So taking advantage of their chance taking, whether it's with political entrepreneurs tapping into that, whether it's with, the Robin Hoods and the DraftKings and the Citadels and everyone else who is a market maker for the bet, everyone else who's a bookie for this. And there we have it, Phil. That's our world today in a nutshell. The long now, permanent debt servitude of entire generations, but perfectly palatable at any given moment because you think you can, you can gamble your way out of it. You can hit it big. It's Hunger Games. It's, may the odds ever be in your favor. It's just the Hunger Games without the funny wigs, although sometimes that too.
You referenced what's going on with universities, costs. It's unbelievable. Now, you got a PhD from Harvard, and you were a tenured professor at NYU. So when I say it, I think I'm just howling at the moon. But when you say it, it carries a lot more weight. You were in this system. You spent a good part of your life in this system. You're a tenured professor. We're seeing an explosion in costs on one side, right? Mm-hmm. And you talked about this. You said that more than 6% of the American economy is spent on education, 1.6 trillion a year based on current GDP levels. It's 6% of the American economy, and it's twice as much as we spend on defense. You were talking about University of Michigan. There are 24,000 administrators at the University of Michigan, which is 8 times more than tenured or tenure track faculty, 3 times more than all faculty, 3 times more just on administrators at a time where everyone's complaining that I can't afford to pay for college. And then you've got DEI programs, 120 person, $18 million a year, Office of DEI at University of Michigan. $18 million a year for 120 people.
Yep.
Right? And you look, over the last 10 years, college costs have outpaced inflation by 25% annually. I mean, it's just outrageous with no end to it, subsidized by the government, right? You've got federal grants on top of all this, federal grants going to universities on top of guaranteeing the debt and everything else. You've got foreign donations.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Why
look,
is the foreign government interested in financing a university in America? How is that in the interest of Qatar, for example, is one of the top financiers? So you have all this flood of so much money and energy going into these universities for what? At a time when the information that's conveyed to students, at a time where the educational content is more accessible for free than it's ever been, ever in the history of the world.
I often talk about my time in academia as being part of the church with a capital C. And I think that is more true than ever. So the role of higher education in our society today is so similar to the relationship that the Catholic Church had in European society in, leading up to the Reformation. So 1200s, 1300s, 1400s, even at the 1500s, it's the same relationship. And when I say it's the same relationship to society, I mean it in so many particular ways. First of all, the church in medieval Europe, there was a lot wrong with it and also did an enormous amount of good. And I feel the same way let me put it this way. There were a lot of really good people in the church, medieval and today. Same in academia. The best people I know, frankly, are college and university administrators and faculty. They're not just smart people. There are a lot of smart people in the world, no more smart people than Wall Street, but they're really well intentioned. And they're not in the business to make money themselves. And I think that was very true of the church in the medieval period, and frankly, the church today. What happens, whether it's the medieval church or higher education today, is that the nature of the institution calcifies, it becomes inwardly focused, it becomes a money machine, and the requirement for more and more money takes over its spiritual or educational being, right? Despite the good people who are in these organizations. So the note I wrote is called the intellectual rot of the modern university, right? Of it starts with looking at Claudine Gay, the former president of Harvard, who was a graduate student in my department right after I was there. So I know Claudine Gay. She's as smart as they come. She's a good person. She really is. She was also a failed university president. And she's a failed university president in the same way that the bishops and archbishops of the medieval church, they were failed leaders as well. The institution has calcified. The institution has become about money because the institution has become a credentialing institution. It's not about education. It's about providing that credential for, I call it the Hogwarts sorting hat. That's the role that universities play today, higher education plays today. It's our sorting hat. It is supported and funded by the government. What do we get out of the grants and the like? We get a lot of research, and it's not fanciful stuff. It's the university system is the backbone of all scientific research that happens in this country. It really is, Phil. I mean, it doesn't happen in private industry. It certainly doesn't happen in government organizations. It happens at universities. That's where it happens. So there's a lot of good that happens. There is real education that happens. There is credentialing, and there's a role for credentialing that happens. But it's become this gigantic, almost self-aware, self-preserving institution that, like the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, has to be reformed. Your example of Michigan and their DEI program is a really good one. So it's what Michigan calls DEI 2.0. DEI 1.0 is everything that I suggest you and I suspect you and I think is correct about. Personally, I think little d diversity is a really good thing. I also think the same thing about, little e equity and little I inclusion. These are all really good things.
100%.
And you know what the DEI office in Michigan used to do? It used to do things like, we're going to put on a program for poor kids in high school in Ypsilanti and Detroit, and we're going to help them apply to college, be successful students when they get into college. We're going to provide need-based and merit-based awards for graduate students, who've, ex-vets, again, poor kids. It's like, yes, please. But what the DEI 2.0 has done, and why it requires this enormous budget and requires all these administrators, is that it becomes inwardly focused. It's no longer about little d diversity, little e equity for students and the mission, the educational mission of the university. It becomes an inquisition, just like happened in the Catholic Church. It becomes an inwardly facing bureaucracy that is designed to impose correct thought on the faculty. It's a totally different mission. It's happened in organizations all across the country. And it's really a perversion of the original diversity, equity, and inclusion to become this modern day inquisition of thought police within an institution. So anyway, can go on and on. I just don't want it to come across as that I'm anti the people in these institutions, because I'm really not.
No, and
Just
it's
like,
not really a question of that. It's a question is this a net good for all of us, right? So there's a 4-year opportunity cost out of every young person's career that they could be compounding and learning and hands-on and actually working. That's 4 years at minimum. That's taken off the table if you want a ticket to get a white collar job. If you want a good job, got to go to college. That means that right away, forgetting even about the money, you're 4 years back, right? The money is out of control. It's absolutely out of control. And the idea that this is some sort of preparation for the job market. I mean, you can look and see what's happening on college campuses now, putting aside the education, whether the education is helpful for careers or not, or whether that education is available through just reading good Substacks and listening to podcasts, or just buying the books on your own. Let's put all that aside, right? There is a very large, maybe an outsized visually, or maybe we see more of them than otherwise, but there is clearly a very large contingent of people that are in American universities that have zero mental toughness or fortitude or grit or street smarts or ability to really function on their own in this world without this supportive infrastructure behind them. And it's pretty scary. I mean, I see I don't want to hire these. I mean, this is from the top university, from Ivy League universities, where someone like me should be falling over themselves to get access to this talent. And I hear them speak, and I see what they say, and it's like, they know nothing. They're soft. They're not people that.
but hang on, Phil. Who do you hear? Who do you hear? You see the people who you like, the demonstrators?
I guess I'm
who are you
speaking
talking
now
about?
because well, I mean, again, I talk about these podcasts being evergreen, but I guess now, just to bring it to current events, what's most top of mind is seeing the protests of people
Yeah.
about what's happening in Israel, Gaza 4 years ago as Black Lives Matter, but they don't seem to know anything about the topic. They don't seem to be pushing it. Just what I see, and again, what I'm seeing
Yeah.
might be kind of selected as,
Yeah.
maybe not what I see is absolutely pathetic. It's just pathetic.
Yeah, I'm pausing here, Phil, because I think that part of what I've kind of come to not learn, but by being so sensitized now, kind of immersed in this notion of stories and narrative creation, is that I think the most important question you can ask yourself as a consumer of the news that is washing over us constantly, the most important question to ask is, why am I reading this now? Why am I reading this now? I'm not saying that it's not news. I'm not saying it's fake news. And I watched the protesters at Columbia. Look, my daughters are at UCLA and USC. I've got 2 daughters at 2 of these schools. And I see the same things that you do, and they make me angry too. But I have to ask myself, why am I reading this now? Why am I seeing this now? Because I know you're at USC and UCLA, this isn't all the students. It's news on the campus, and this is all real, and it's all really happening. But the degree to which, and I hear it in your voice, like you're really upset about it. I get upset about it when I watch it, and I think to myself, why am I being made upset here? Because it is being presented to us to make us upset. It really is. Even though on the vast majority of college campuses, there aren't encampments, there aren't protests, and there's no shortage of, silly people, silly kids. Actually, I think about myself when I was 19 or 20 years old, and I think about the things I thought and say, I mean, I'm just so grateful that Twitter and Facebook and all this stuff didn't exist when I was 19 or 20 years old, because God knows the stupid ass things have said and would be still with me today. So I'm of two minds here, Phil, because I have the same reaction when I see the stuff that you do. And I'm also convinced that we are being shown, we're sitting in a cave. This is the old Plato analogy of the cave. We're sitting there and there's somebody showing us, puppet images of student protesters saying really stupid things, getting us all angry, so that we're focused on that instead of, let's call it, the real problems of our society, which we started this program talking about. That wealth inequality, the inability to move forward, the scleroticism, the calcification of our institutions, the fact that scientific research doesn't, happen outside of some colleges and the like. All of this is of a piece. It's like we're being stripped for parts, Phil, while we're being shown pictures that make us all angry about something. I mean, I have friends who are all angry about the Trump trial, or all angry about, oh, look at that, Joe Biden stuttering again, fumbling again. And we're all upset about this. I think a lot of it is, if not intentional, Phil, I think it's certainly designed to keep us angry and focused on things that don't matter for the underlying issues that we've got.
I mean, that could be, the algorithm certainly serves up, it responds to things that works up. And sometimes I think, man, this country, we're headed to a civil war. Everyone hates everyone. There's no way out of this. Then I go for a walk and I see my neighbor and I smile and I say hello and they say hello. And, I get on a work call with people of all different backgrounds and everyone's getting along and working together. And you realize that it is not real life. So, yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think, but the university thing is so concerning to me. I'm not inside the universities. I don't see the regular, 99% of the people that maybe just want to go to class and be left alone. I don't have any exposure to that.
Exactly. We don't, and we don't even have exposure at the universities. I mentioned Vanderbilt earlier. I mean, Vanderbilt doesn't have an encampment.
Yeah.
You know why? Because some kids made a little play at doing it and they suspended them.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, okay. So, and I think a lot of this has been just colossal mismanagement at university leadership. It's absurd, right? How bad some of the leadership has been, but and when it's bad, then that becomes the story, and it's all we're immersed in. I mean, for me, Phil, the thing I can't get over is, CNN 24/7 coverage of the Trump trial, which to my mind is a very sketchy prosecution, very sketchy. And nobody talks about Trump Media and Technology Group and Susquehanna and Jeff Yass, doing this SPAC for Trump Social that's going to put more than $5 billion into Trump's pocket. I mean, nobody talks about that. It's like, yeah, that happened. And all of our attention is on this show trial. It's that old Succession line, right? Where the, Logan Roy at the end there is talking to these kids and says, I love you, but you are not serious people. We're not a serious society. And I think the reason we're not serious is because we are so easily made angry or entertained.
Yeah. Well, speaking of unserious people, for a long time, years ago, Bitcoin was, the rallying cry, one of the rallying cries, long Bitcoin, short the bankers. And the whole idea is we're going to rebuild a whole monetary system, a whole financial system outside the system, outside of corruption. a fixed supply. We can't print it to death. You can't, all these things. And you were the first one to say this is going to be co-opted by Wall Street.
Mhm.
And you had, Bitcoin TM, and you were talking about this. Now everyone's talking about it. It's come to pass. It happened.
Yep.
One of the many things that you got right. Larry Fink, none other than Larry Fink, has suddenly got walked up to the front of the line by the SEC when firms have been trying to launch Bitcoin ETFs for 8 or 9 years. All of a sudden,
Yep.
BlackRock gets walked up to the front of the line, and now they've got $18 billion in an iShares ETF listed on US exchanges, regulated by the Fed. I mean, this could not be further inside the system than it is today, and Wall Street's now collecting their toll on it.
Yep.
You saw this before anybody.
I think I kind of did. And it's look, I mean, this is, again, it's the story we tell ourselves over and over again. And one of the great stories we tell ourselves is that of co-option. We tell ourselves a story. If you're the insurgent, say, "Oh, I'm the Trojan horse, right? Once I get in there, I'm going to change the system from the inside." And that story always has a very sad ending. This isn't Hollywood, right? These the stories of our lives that repeat themselves over and over again. It's not the hero's journey, right? It's real life subsumes, or power subsumes these stories. The stories are wonderfully motivating, but there are other stories, and those stories are of co-option, of subsuming, of absorbing. And that's what's happened with Bitcoin. It's another game on the Wall Street casino floor today. Its number go up, I was talking about earlier. And it just makes me really sad because I admire so much of that OG Bitcoin ethos: long time horizon, personal autonomy, self-sufficiency, entrepreneurialism. Man, I identify enormously with that ethos. And what do we end up with? We end up with Larry Fink and talking about how many basis points this ETF is going to charge versus that ETF. Like I say, it's just another table game in the Wall Street casino. And at the same time, and this is why Larry Fink's walked up to the head of the line, Bitcoin now becomes painted in day glow orange for Treasury to see and track. The sources of power in our world, which I'll represent by the US Treasury and Wall Street, they both got what they wanted. Treasury wants to see all the money in the world. They don't want to own it, but they want to see it. By the way, that is the secret about all of our tax laws and Treasury laws. They're all designed so that the US Treasury can see all the money in the world. That is their goal. They are the eye of Sauron, and the goal is to see all the money in the world. So the invisibility or the pseudonymity, I know it's not anonymous, but the pseudonymity of Bitcoin, that cannot stand. That must not stand. So Treasury's goal is to see all the money. They can track it. They can tax it if necessary, but they can see it. They know where all the money is. And Wall Street wants flow. Wall Street wants flow. So Wall Street and Washington got what they wanted. They never wanted to kill crypto, just, ban Bitcoin. You bring it into the fold. It's one of the oldest stories, Phil, and we just saw it played out again.
Amazing. It's been 6 years since you wrote about financial markets being turned into political utilities.
Yep.
Everything we've seen over the last 6 years since you wrote that, have you, do you think we're in a different place today? Do you feel vindicated, proven right? Do you think the story's
Oh,
any different?
100%. Is the story any different than what it was? My hope is that, quote unquote, normalizing interest rates will create a necessity for productive uses of capital. Right? What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is when the cost of money is zero for large corporations, you don't do anything risky. Why would you take a gamble like, oh, I'm going to build a new factory, or oh, I'm going to invest in this new technology? You don't. Why would you take a risk when you can take as much money as you want, buy back your stock, take another turn of leverage? I mean, why not take another turn of leverage? The money doesn't cost me anything. This is financialization. This is financialization. It's earnings growth, it's profit growth without revenue growth, without productivity growth. And that's what we saw for 15 years. My hope is that now that money is not free, that there's actually a cost to capital again, that it will require businesses, large and small, to take risk. Because it is in that risk taking that our economy actually grows.
Yeah.
It is in that risk taking that all of the goodness of liberal democracy and capitalism can flourish. It requires risk taking. So my hope, my sincere hope, is that we normalize the price of money, and that leads us to a normalization of risk taking, failure and success, creating a pathway for young and old and in between through smarts and hard work to be successful, to take a risk, to make it work. That hasn't been the world we've been in for the last 20 years. I'm hopeful that we can break out of that and return to a world of risk taking. I don't think I'm going to, I don't think I'm right. Unfortunately, I think those hopes are going to be dashed, because I think once you reach a $10 word alert equilibrium, a balancing point of the long now, where it is constant political fear, constant economic stimulus driven by debt, driven by bringing the future into the present, I think it takes an enormous amount of pain, more than just normalizing the price of money, to get out of that equilibrium. But I have hope, Phil. I have to have hope.
Well, risk taking is certainly, I mean, you yourself have been an entrepreneur. Agency and risk taking is, I mean, that, like you said, I mean, that is the seed that turns into everything that's good, everything that comes, everything in our private lives too. The risk taking is what led you to kiss the girl, to ask her out on a date, to ask her to marry you, I mean, whatever
Yep.
you're going to do requires a bit of that. And you love to see it. I think we've seen in our culture, we've seen over the last probably decade, corporate employees being unable to speak their mind and unwilling to speak their mind or lift their head out. And I think some of that is starting to lift as well. Some of that fog is starting to dissipate, and we're seeing people, just be yourself, say what you think, be who you are, express yourself publicly, take those risks. And I think we need more of that. We need more high agency people. And I think we are gonna self-correct and have that.
I hope you're right. I hope you're right. It is a matter of breaking the calcification of all these institutions, whether we're talking about the universities, whether we're talking about major corporations. A lot of them have developed their own inwardly facing inquisitions, to your point. And so I think that by shining a light on that, I think that you do reach a tipping point where there is a sense of internally enough. And I hope externally that those institutions that have calcified, that they actually fail. See, that this is the creative destruction that capitalism does so well. So well. But you have to have a price of money. You have to have risk taking. You have to have a path for human effort to matter. But if you set those three things in motion, man, humanity can accomplish some great things. So, we'll see. We'll see,
Yeah,
right, Phil?
well, I'll add a fourth. I'll add a fourth that you need, which is you need for creative destruction. You need to allow that which needs to be destroyed to be
to
destroyed.
fail.
Which, like after the global financial crisis, when the banks who were overexposed on risk should have failed, and new banks would have come in and taken their place, and they weren't allowed to. And now you have a whole class, it's certainly in the banking industry, but in most industries, where you have a whole class of embedded companies that are so big and dominant that they've been, not allowed to fail even when they should have. So, we do need to get back to those principles too, to free market economics and, to punish companies that deserve to be punished, not have them bailed out by, by the Fed or the Treasury or whoever it is.
Yeah, right on. And the problem, as always, is one of scale, because once any institution becomes too large, then the cost of just allowing it to fail, but they really do become too great. I mean, I don't think that it, I know you were there too. I mean, when Lehman went under, it wasn't just the Lehman, it was like, oh crap, who's next? And does the whole system come unglued? I think that we've developed a world that rewards scale and optimization to such a great degree. And not to give too much credit, to Leb on this, but I think he's right. Once a system becomes one of a few actors of great scale, and where everything is optimized, then they're terribly non-robust. That any little shock can really damage them, and they have become too big to fail. Right? J.P. Morgan can't fail. It really can't. So the answer, I think, is not to wait until it gets so horrible that you're faced with a choice of, oh, do we let a company that's too big to fail? I think what you have to do is you have to break up the too big to fail companies. Yeah. So whether it's the technology monopolies or whether it's the banking monopolies, I think the answer is to bust up the trusts. I think that's the answer.
Yeah. Well, this is such great stuff. Thank you again for coming on. Where can people read more, learn more about you, and read?
I'm Epsilon Theory, just everywhere. So Twitter at Epsilon Theory, epsilontheory.com. Yeah, it's a different way of seeing the world. And I think once you do, it's both, it's hard to go back. See it, right. see it differently forever.
Yeah, you can't unsee it. Like I said before, you just can't unsee it. So thanks again, Ben. We're gonna have to do an episode 5 next year, but really appreciate your time, and we'll talk soon.
Anytime, Phil. My pleasure.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Phil Bach Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment to drop a review. This show was published for entertainment purposes only and is not investment advice. Please contact a licensed professional before making any investments. Some of the securities discussed on the show may be owned by its participants. Opinions expressed on the show may not reflect those of their employers. Stay hungry and stay foolish.